Hi, I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, better to be safe than sorry as San Diego prepares for the height of fire season, the challenge on Capitol Hill in funding the firefight.
And will California's new Motor Voter Act really drive up voter turnout? I'm Peggy Pico. How automatic registration could impact San Diego County voters. Then, why a government advisory group says the health of the planet should be considered in the new U.S. dietary guidelines.
All of these agencies and companies are kind of, in lockstep with each other on this green energy rush, whether it's actually beneficial to us or not.
The binational project leading a nationwide scramble for renewable energy and the worries from San Diego homeowners behind a legal challenge. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. A hot debate shaping up on California's fire lines. We're now learning nearly 40% of the state's inmate firefighters have previous convictions for violent offenses. This contradicts a claim by prison officials who say only nonviolent inmates were allowed in the program. The Corrections Department dropped a proposal yesterday to expand its program to include prisoners with violent backgrounds. San Diego's fire season is year-round, and it's important everyone prepares for the possibility of a major wildfire. Don't wait for first responders to help. You need to be ready and set to go if disaster strikes.
This is October. This is the normal time when we get fires. It's time to take a look outside about what you can do to make sure that you have defensible space, that you're protecting yourselves. Be your own first responder. It starts at home.
San Diego Congressman Scott Peters joined by U.S. Interior Secretary Sally Jewell at the CAL FIRE Incident Command Center in El Cajon.
We were flying over the region. We see a lot of individual homes with fuel right up next to them.
Peters is part of a bipartisan coalition pushing for a vote in Congress to treat wildfire funding just like they do other natural disasters. But Secretary Jewell says people in powerful positions in Congress have not supported it.
So when we have a bad fire year, we take money from the prevention fund, we take money from the burned area rehabilitation fund, and we use that to suppress the fires. And what that does is it increases the spiral of increasing hotter fires. It makes it much worse. It costs us more in the long run.
California is experiencing one of the driest periods in state history, and San Diegans know all too well the destruction caused by the 2004 and 2007 fires. The message here: be prepared and have a plan of your own.
Let's do what San Diegans do. Let's not wait for some other government to solve the problem. Let's make sure we take it up at a community level and an individual level and address this issue as well.
San Diego Fire has put together a personal wildfire action guide. You can find it online at sandiego.gov/fire. California's Fair Political Practices Commission has advised San Diego Supervisor Bill Horn that he should recuse himself from voting on a key housing development in his district. We're joined live by KPBS North County Bureau reporter Allison St. John. She says Lilac Hill Ranch is controversial and Horn could be the swing vote. Allison?
Yes, County Supervisor Bill Horn's vote could be key for the approval of Lilac Hills Ranch, a major housing development of 1,700 homes. It would be on agricultural land north of Escondido, where the county's general plan for growth calls for only about 100 homes. California's Fair Political Practices Commission has concluded that because Horn's property is less than 2 miles away, the proposed development could have a, quote, reasonable, foreseeable financial effect on his property values. The commission advised him not to vote on the plan because of that conflict of interest. Now, Horn responded last night by calling the advice outrageous and a dangerous affront to our Constitution, but said in a statement that he would, quote, abstain with great trepidation. However, today he has backtracked and says he will ask the FPPC to reconsider, and county staff tell us that they will support this and will postpone the vote until they hear back from the commission, perhaps with a revised decision on his conflict of interest. Without Horn's vote, it's doubtful the project would get the 3 votes it needs to go ahead. And much is at stake because Lilac Hills is seen as a bellwether for many other development projects waiting in the wings for amendments to the general plan. Alison St. John, KPBS News.
A new tool in the fight against cyber exploitation. A state website launched today for victims of revenge porn. That's when someone posts explicit nude images of their spouse or significant other without their permission. Social media sites and search engines like Twitter, Yahoo, and Google have removed the search term revenge porn in an effort to fight cyber exploitation.
When something's illegal, the victims don't always know what to do to fix it after the fact. So this will be a great resource for victims and the advocates who are helping them rebuild their lives.
We'll have information to help police prosecute cases and help victims remove images from offending websites. OK Computer, UC San Diego marks a digital milestone today, celebrating a powerful machine, cracking genomes and exploring the universe. KPBS Tech's reporter David Wagner says it shows how far technology has come.
The San Diego Supercomputer Center is celebrating the launch of a new data-crunching supercomputer. It's called Comet, and it can process 2 quadrillion calculations per second. Comet is coming online as the Supercomputer Center marks its 30th anniversary. Director Michael Norman says Comet shows how far computing has come.
It is 2 million times as powerful as the first supercomputer that we had when we opened our doors 30 years ago.
Norman says back in 1985, supercomputers were only as powerful as an iPhone is today. Comet is funded for the next 5 years by a $21 million grant from the National Science Foundation. David Wagner, KPBS News.
Well, it may be the driving force behind a new boost in registered voters. California is now the second state to automatically register them. Peggy Pico takes a look at the new motor voter law.
Starting next summer, Californians will be automatically registered to vote when they obtain or renew a driver's license or identification card at the DMV. Joining me with a closer look at voting challenges and trends are my guests, Chris Wilson, Associate Director for Alliance San Diego, and Brian Adams, Political Science Professor at San Diego State University. And Chris, it's estimated more than 6 million Californians who are eligible to vote are not even registered. What are the numbers like here in San Diego County?
Well, here in San Diego County, we have about 600,000 people who are eligible to vote who aren't registered.
And at just 42% voter turnout, it was a record low during last year's midterm elections here in California. So what kind of impact do you think this motor voter law will have on a turnout either here and or statewide?
Well, if it were just up to just registering more people to vote, it might not have a big impact. But what registering more people to vote means is that organizations, campaigns, and policymakers have more people to reach out to and improve the turnout.
And Brian, would you like to add to that as far as this law and the impact on voter turnout?
Generally, these types of laws that make voting more convenient and more accessible don't make that big of an impact, especially in a state like California where it's already relatively easy to register. It may have a minimal impact, and especially, as Chris suggested, indirectly it may have an impact by increasing the pool of voters that can be contacted.
So why do it?
I think, well, there's no harm in it. There's no harm in registering people to vote. And if it can be done, and many countries around the world already automatically register people to vote when they turn 18 or voting age. So, when you think about the cost benefit, there may not be that much benefit, but there's certainly very little cost to it.
And Brian, historically, who votes and who doesn't vote? Is there a dividing line?
Typically, better educated, higher income, and older individuals vote more. And especially when you have an election like in 2014, where voter turnout was significantly less than in 2012 in the presidential election. The people who drop out tend to be people who are younger and are less educated and of a lower socioeconomic status.
And Chris, what kind of barriers that keep voters away on Election Day?
Information keeps voters away. Lack of motivation or inspiration from candidates keeps voters away. Indirect or unintentional voter suppression keeps voters away.
So making it hard for certain people to get to the polls?
Making it hard for certain people to get to the polls. Also putting polling locations in places where people culturally would not go, like funeral homes, police stations, things of that sort keep people away.
I see. And Brian, Chris mentioned this idea of information or the lack thereof. How does that weigh in?
Well, Typically, voters who are more interested in politics are much more likely to vote. And one way to get people interested is to give them information. So information can play a role in sort of sparking political interest of getting people motivated to actually participate in the election.
And getting information from sources like where?
Alliance San Diego.
Okay.
Campaigns and candidates, ballot initiative campaigns. There's a lot of work that can be done in motivating people to turn out to vote, and it's not just the government's responsibility. We have to talk to our neighbors and our friends and our family in order to improve their awareness and the information they have so they can make informed decisions at the polls.
And speaking of which, Alliance has some programs to engage voters. Give us a few highlights.
So one of our programs, we contact low-income voters because many times these people are busy at work or in their daily lives don't have time to seek out the information that would help them make informed decisions. So we knock on their doors and we call them and we provide the information that they might normally get in other places.
And we'll have to end on this. Brian, is there another strategy besides this motor voter or these engaging that you think would be particularly helpful?
Most of the research has shown that get out the vote drives are actually the most effective way to get people to vote. And the types of work that Chris is doing is actually going to probably have a bigger impact on voter turnout than automatic registration.
All right, Brian Adams, Chris Wilson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
California immigrants facing deportation because of drug offenses could get a reprieve under a new law signed by Governor Jerry Brown. Right now, a conviction for a simple drug possession may have serious consequences for immigrants with or without legal documentation. The new California law allows immigrants to retract their guilty pleas and have their cases dismissed once they attend court-ordered rehab. County supervisors approved a revised solar farm project after a lawsuit found it violated state environmental law. The new plan will provide alternative energy for up to 26,000 homes. A handful of neighbors spoke against the project, but supervisors say it's needed to meet state and federal clean energy requirements. Following up now on a historic wind farm powering San Diego homes from Mexico. In part two of a special report, KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero explains why a legal battle against the project has yet to blow over.
No, I just make stuff. I don't like to see stuff get thrown away. I like to see it repurposed.
Mark Ostrander lives in Jacumba Hot Springs, footsteps from the border fence. His property is a maze of vintage machines and other equipment he tinkers with and recycles. He even installed a vertical access wind turbine on his property.
I don't pay a utility bill at this point because I have solar and wind. I'm trying to do my part to reduce my carbon footprint.
So it may come as a surprise to learn that Ostrander is part of a lawsuit against a historic wind farm in Mexico. Energia Sierra Juarez is the first renewable energy project between the U.S. and Mexico, operated by Sempra Energy affiliates Iannova and Intergen. Ostrander can see the turbines from his property, and he's concerned about fire. He's a retired battalion chief for the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection.
My main forte was in wildland firefighting.
He says the industrial scale of Energia Sierra Juarez makes it a fire threat, especially during drought. It includes 47 turbines, a nearly 5-mile cross-border transmission line, and 25 miles of new roads. Its operators plan to build even more turbines, expanding capacity by 700%. All of the electricity is sold to San Diego Gas and Electric under an $820 million power purchase agreement. The project is part of a nationwide scramble for renewable energy. California must get half of its electricity from renewables by the year 2030.
All of these agencies and companies are kind of, in lockstep with each other on this green energy rush, whether it's actually beneficial to us or not.
That's Donna Tisdale, who lives northwest of Ostrander in Boulevard. She's leading the lawsuit, which also names the U.S. government. She says the Department of Energy issued a presidential permit to the project without evaluating alternatives, as the law requires. Alternatives include distributive options like Ostrander's home solar panels.
We feel like energy should be generated closer to the point of use.
That would eliminate the need for long transmission lines, wildlife damage out in rural areas, and fires, she says. The Department of Energy did not respond to requests for comment. Sempra Energy also declined an interview. Tisdale argues the government failed to consider environmental impacts in Mexico. The defendants counter they don't have to, so long as Mexico approves. Mexico's National Environmental Agency, Semarnat, gave the project a green light.
No solamente cumple con los temas de impacto ambiental.
It not only meets environmental impact requirements, it also deals with climate change and global warming problems.
That's Semarnat Representative Alfonso Blancafort. He says Mexico is benefiting from the project, even though it's not getting any of the electricity.
¿Qué sucede? Nosotros aquí tenemos la percepción de ser una región.
Here we have the perception of being a region. If we have a wind farm that generates electricity with low impact on the environment and lower emissions to the atmosphere, the whole region benefits.
Mexican officials and company leaders applauded the project during a ribbon-cutting ceremony at the wind farm earlier this summer. They say it signals a new chapter of cross-border collaboration on renewables.
Both the U.S. and the Mexican governments have been, as part of the bilateral agenda, have been talking a lot about increasing cooperation on renewable energy, especially along the border. And I would say that this is a good and clear example of what this cooperation can accomplish.
Recent energy reforms in Mexico helped push the project forward. Tisdale says she knows her lawsuit won't be able to undo the first phase of the project, but there's still the expansion to think of.
Sempra offered us a settlement agreement. We declined. You have to be of a certain persuasion to enjoy country life, and not everyone appreciates it, but it's really missed when it's gone.
She says she plans to keep fighting as long as she can. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
Learning the difference between teaching awareness and environmental activism. It's at the top of the agenda for an environmental education conference in San Diego, attracting more than 1,000 educators from around the world.
But we don't necessarily promote a particular environmental behavior, so it's often that we teach people about how to think, not what to think.
Scientists say San Diego is one of the most distinctive conservation hotspots in North America thanks to its biodiversity. The conference officially begins tomorrow morning. Some food for thought now on new dietary guidelines. One proposal sparked a national conversation on the connection between food and health. Peggy Pico finds out why.
For the first time, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee recommended a food sustainability system rich in plant-based foods should be included in the federal government's nutritional guidelines. But that's not happening this year. Here to discuss sustainable foods for our health and the planet is my guest, Associate Professor Cheryl Anderson with UC San Diego School of Medicine. And Cheryl, you were on this year's Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. What are the panel recommendations for food supply sustainability and the new dietary guidelines?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, and it's a real pleasure to be able to discuss this with you today. We actually think about sustainability in the context of a larger framework. And that framework is called a socio-ecologic model, where we think about what can an individual in and of themselves do to accomplish their health and nutrition goals, and what are the other things that are important in their being able to do that, such as their family environment, their social and cultural environment, as well as policies that are in place around them to support what it is that they want to do. It turns out that sustainability was really one of 5 key areas that we focused on. And as you mentioned, it's one of the areas that's been getting a lot of attention because the Secretaries of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Agriculture recently said that they will not be pulling our recommendations forward as they consider what they're going to do in terms of guidelines. So we recommended, based on what we found in one of our other parts of deliberations, that the plant-based diets that we support in terms of lowering the amount of red and processed meats in the diets, including more seafood and lean meats, and increasing the amount of fruits and vegetables, there was evidence to support that those recommendations were more sustainable in terms of land, water, energy, and greenhouse gas emissions than diets that didn't necessarily meet those recommendations.
Well, one of the bold recommendations that's standing out is that Americans cut back, as you said, on red meat, cow meat, not only for their health, but for this climate change and sort of helping to combat that. So what is the link specifically between raising cows for food and climate change or sustainability?
Yeah, so I will say that, first of all, the evidence that we found around this issue was actually categorized as moderate, and we brought in expert consultants to talk with us. You know, many of us are nutrition-trained professionals. The biochemistry is what people typically want us to focus on, and are seemingly pushing back a little bit, saying that we didn't focus enough there. But we had the expertise in hand, and we had the literature in hand to show that, again, you know, positive signals in terms of land, water, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions. And where meat is concerned, methane production being one of the primary associated issues with more meat consumption and production than with plants.
What about critics who say, you know, meat to plant-based nutrition is unfair because 10 pounds of meat will feed more people than 10 pounds of apple, let's say?
That's an incredibly important point, and I want to reiterate that we, in this Dietary Guidelines Advisory Report, we talk about many paths to accomplishing a healthful dietary pattern. And that includes 3 clear patterns: a Mediterranean pattern, a prudent American pattern, as well as the dietary approaches to stop hypertension-related dietary patterns that all include meat. The vegetarian pattern was investigated, and we found that it did confer positive health outcomes in the studies that we looked at, but the majority of our patterns are not exclusive of meat. So those statements are certainly well worth our consideration. And I just want to remind everyone that the committee did not say that Americans should not be consuming meat.
Right. It was part of a bigger plan. Now, let me ask you this. The USDA and Health and Human Services says they're not going to include this portion in the dietary guidelines this year. How else would you like to see the sustainability recommendations used?
So, despite that recent revelation by the secretaries, this has been a really wonderful opportunity for our nation to start an important conversation around sustainability. And we've had many sectors of our nutrition communities talking about sustainability, which we didn't quite have happening in the past. So from that perspective, I think this is fantastic. I would like for us to be able to take the report and look at some of these other key recommendations, such as what are the components of healthful diets that will confer health benefit, and what are the ones that we need to minimize a bit. Let's talk a little bit about food access. Let's talk about health equity. Let's talk about physical activity and dietary patterns together. And truthfully, when we look at the issues in San Diego, it's really tobacco use, food, and physical activity that drives half the mortality that we see.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Cheryl Anderson, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's an honor that scared the best out of San Diego. City made the top 10 list for the best trick-or-treating cities in the nation. San Diego ranked number 8. That from the housing site Zillow. Del Mar Heights was honored as the best local neighborhood. The list considers anything from home values to how close houses are to each other, or how close houses are to each other. San Francisco topped the list for the 5th year in a row. Now on the silver screen in San Diego, a unique film festival featuring the stories of military service members. Debt of Honor is one of the films in this year's GI Film Festival. KPBS film critic Beth Accomando chats with the director about his work with disabled veterans.
Debt of Honor tells the history of disabled veterans in America through interviews with people who understand the issues firsthand, like Tammy Duckworth. She was a pilot in Iraq and was about to pick up passengers when her helicopter was hit.
The blast from the RPG going off vaporized my right leg, and the force of the blast kicked my left leg up into the instrument panel of the aircraft and amputated it, and it blew off the entire back of my right arm. I never got a tourniquet. I never got any first aid because they assumed that I was dead.
The heroism, of course, on the battlefield is one thing. It's the heroism of just everyday life, of people who have learned the lessons of tremendous difficulty and struggle, which we all do one way or the other. But they have these kind of, the bar is set high when you're Max Cleland and you're a triple amputee. The point of the film was to look at it historically, but look at it viscerally through the points of view of a handful of men and women who had been there, to think and feel what that reality is like. And I guarantee you, I mean, J.R. Martinez puts it really well in the film. He said, listen, if you take any American
and you put him in that environment for,
2 hours. You know, you put them in that environment for 2 weeks, you know, 2 tours. I guarantee you they're going to come back with a completely different outlook on life.
I'm afraid we're always going to have war. It's been part of human experience since, as far as we know, the beginning. It is one of the hardest things to understand, and therefore when it happens, every resource needs to be brought to bear to understand it.
That includes the kind of documentary and fiction filmmaking being highlighted this week at the GI Film Festival. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
Debt of Honor screens tonight at the Joan Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice and airs November 10th here on KPBS. Temperature still above normal today, but we're expecting a cooling trend to start as a second storm system moves into San Diego. Looking at 70s along the coast over the next few days. 70s and 80s if you're in the Inland Valley section. 70s and 60s, look at that, in the mountain areas, and even down into the 90s for the desert, finally. Here's a look at what we are working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom on Morning Edition. Taking down Operation Boo, the advocacy group protesting a program forcing registered sex offenders to post signs on their front doors. That's tomorrow on KPBS Radio. Of course, you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. You have a great night.